So today we'll talk about sort of a phenomenon that you read a lot about in Wall Street Journal, artificial intelligence taking human jobs. And this is an education conference. And a lot of these conversations that I'm hearing here are around what's going to be needed for jobs of the future when technologies such as artificial intelligence will be sort of taking over current set of jobs, and humans will need to sort of find other things. So there's a lot of that going on right now in the conference. But WorkFusion is really one of the companies that is sort of acting on the other side, which is using its technology, which is AI-based technology, to eliminate a lot of the work within large enterprises around back office, middle office, and so forth and so on. So that's sort of intelligent automation space that we fall under. So if you take a look at what McKinsey says, basically they're projecting, and rightfully so, that 51% of current tasks in sort of all over in every job that is out there, so half of all the tasks out there, can be automated with the current set of technologies, meaning the current achievement of artificial intelligence is sufficient to eliminate these sort of types of work that are more or less repetitive. And if you think about big companies, it's a lot of data entry, a lot of data collection. So if you think about when you go to a bank, somebody opens up an account for you, these are the types of jobs that we're talking about. And we're talking about trillions of dollars here, 50%. But it is a significant amount. And that's what's really sort of driving a lot of this fear and a lot of these conversations top down around AI taking over work, right? So this is really, the next industrial revolution from a technology perspective. And if you think about segments like banking, financial services, insurance, healthcare, telco, retail, a lot of them, have probably 70% of their staff really doing that type of work, right? Data entry, working with documents, and pretty much sort of conducting that type of repetitive pattern work that can be automated. So if you think in the overall amount, there is a huge impact to the jobs and to the economy that is currently happening on the way. So what is the big deal? Why, just to get down to it, why sort of now and why not 10 years ago? Why are we hearing about AI all of a sudden? And AI has been around since 1956, at least the initial concepts, and it went through several winters. The big thing here is machine learning. Here's the inventor of self-driving concept, which we sort of subscribe to, and essentially talks about we no longer have to program computers. Computers can be taught by example. And this is a big difference. If you think about how you teach children to do things, you don't program them, you don't tell them every specific rule out there. You actually just sort of do things and they follow by example. And that makes things a lot more sort of fluent and faster to be able to teach to another either human being or a machine. So machine learning is akin to sort of children learning from adults by example. And that very much is how self-driving car works. For example, the driver provides what is called a training set to the car when he drives, or he or she drives, and the car learns by example and over time is able to drive more and more. So the change in paradigm, the big thing here is that machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, sometimes called narrow artificial intelligence, when mainstream, the technology is finally ready and is being applied in many companies. And so we went from humans actually programming and providing rules to computers, exact instructions, to humans just providing examples without having to know how to code, and machines are writing their own programs, if you will. That's the big thing. And if you look at a company like WorkFusion that actually uses this technology that we developed at MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence labs, here's a screenshot from WorkFusion. And this could be a process that is happening, let's say, in the back office of any company, maybe invoice processing or account payables or compliance process. And in orange, you see This is human labor. Basically, people are doing work. And over time, by watching those people perform their specific set of tasks that they're doing day in, day out, WorkFusion actually learns. And the blue is artificial intelligence actually is taking over that work. This is within several weeks. I think there's a 3-week span. And actually is able to perform a lot more work that humans couldn't handle before. So the software robots are actually taking over work. And you see the human contingency goes down. That means you need less and less people to do that particular task. And of course, you can see the robots are, they don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't go on Facebook, and they're able to perform a lot more work. So stuff that was backed up and say, hey, I have so much stuff on my desk, it's piling up, that is all getting done. And it's really sort of very indicative of what's happening in a lot of the enterprises that we work with. They apply WorkFusion to a specific set of processes where they're looking to reduce human involvement, right? And we'll talk about specific examples, but that is the main thing. And a lot of this is not driven by headcount reduction. We want to fire people. We want to free people to be able to do things that are more creative and revenue related versus things that are sort of keeping the business running day to day. So intelligent automation focuses, the technology that we've developed focuses on 2 things. I mean, if you think pretty much any knowledge work out there, if you go to any office, you'll see cubes and cubes of people, and they're really doing a couple of things. They're entering information into some kind of system or a spreadsheet or something, and then of course there is a thought process that goes on, what information and sort of calculations. So if you can subsume 2 of those things, essentially learn to enter information into systems and learn their thinking patterns around what decisions they're making, you can subsume the whole amount of work. The reason why I'm splitting hairs here a little bit, and to people who are not familiar with technology at greater depth, there's 2 different types of technologies that are being used. One is called robotic process automation, and one is machine learning and cognitive. So if you combine those 2 technologies, you can actually pretty much replace a full-time equivalent of probably 70% of work that is happening in any fairly large enterprise. So a couple of things. We call these things robots, right? They're bots. They're not. Sometimes I get asked, well, are you actually bringing physical robots and putting them down on a desk and they're typing? They're software robots. They live inside the computer. That's why they're much faster. But there's a couple of them. One is called robotic bots. So this is the guy, if you look at this screen, does the data entry. There's a bunch of people you may or may not be aware that are just doing data entry work in a lot of companies. And most people's jobs contain some level of data entry. You're entering information into a computer. So the robotic bots just takes that away. It learns how you interact with systems and just basically replaces your hands and some of the thinking process about what information goes into it. And they're able to do it much, much faster. So you take that away from humans. Cognitive bots essentially are now responsible for learning the thought patterns that goes on. And every organization has a lot of people sort of working and haven't been replaced by technology so far because the rules that they sort of keep in their heads are much more complex for current level of, let's say, structured programming. So what we do is we actually learn by watching what people do. We learn their thought patterns, essentially build an equivalent of a neural net, and that's what you're seeing in the video here. Learning by example. So that's the judgment work that goes on in people's heads, and when they say, well, when I receive this type of email, I'm going to write this type of reply, or I'm going to forward it to my colleague, or if I see this in a spreadsheet, this means this particular patient or this particular insured is not suitable to be sort of for this type of reward or for this type of claim, right? So these are all the decisions we're talking about. And then you hear about chatbots. It's also sort of continuation of that. We see a lot more customers moving conversations that they previously were having in the call center via voice to text. And you can go to any type of telco like Verizon and have a chat with your representative. And a lot of them will not be humans. They'll be really chatbots. And essentially, it's the same concept where, if you're able to conduct these conversations via text, the chatbot, again, will learn your thought pattern and your interaction and your language that you're using to communicate and to understand what the customer wants in a specific domain, let's say, setting up accounts and so forth and so on. And over time, we'll be able to conduct this conversation on its own with exceptions, right? If it doesn't understand something, you can delegate it to a human and then get a little bit better. Again, concept of a self-driving car. When a car really gets stumped, it'll delegate it to a human. That's why you should never. If you have a Tesla, you should never just let it drive on its own, because it will hand you over controls when it doesn't know something, right? But it'll get better next time around, hopefully. So the smart automation, and there are a lot of technologies that we sort of bring together, allows you to essentially build a digital enterprise where the vision is an enterprise of the future will have obviously a combination of robots, software robots, and humans working there, where the ratio of robots will probably be much greater. And we can see certainly a future where some enterprises will require a minimum amount of humans and maximum amount of shareholders, for instance, and they will very, very efficient, right? And you can see that happening after the Industrial Revolution, let's say, with certain manufacturing industries where a lot of the human work has been replaced by machines, right? You go into some of these factories that produce things, and you see minimal amount of people on the production floor. So this is really the knowledge enterprise of the future. It just hasn't been done to companies like Citigroup or Humana or AIG, because these are sort of what we think about as knowledge-based companies, right? So we offer sort of a way for customers to scale the robots within the enterprise, because it's kind of scary to let all the robots in, because the change management component is obviously very tough. What do you do with all these people? Again, you want to retrain them perhaps. You don't want to do mass firings. So we slowly introduce different types of robots into the enterprise environment, where sort of that mix between robots and people gets a little bit, first it's very few robots, a lot of people, and then they build up as they go along. As I mentioned, we spun out of MIT CSAIL. It's the technology that we created was very much sort of like a generic technology to be able to learn any type of task across, no matter if it's in healthcare or a city or banking or insurance and so forth and so on. And these are, vastly different. If you talk about medical billing or coding versus processing invoices versus processing things like anti-money laundering or know your customer compliance things, they're a little bit different. That's why you see sort of the set of customers is varied, because everybody, if you think about any industry, there's a lot of manual work. Even in educational industry, there's a lot manual work that goes on still with the systems. So very quick example. You guys probably don't know what trade finance is. I didn't know either. But it's a good example because it just shows how much stuff out there that people are still involved with, right? You think, what are the processes? And you can be very grand and talk about generalities, but trade finance, very specific. It's basically, I call it like fancy PayPal that banks do, right? And it's basically, it's big business. It's multi-billion-dollar business for each large bank. Essentially, they hold money for two trading parties. So when a party in United States and China exchange physical goods, somebody has to hold the money and actually pay both trading parties for the transaction. So again, I call it fancy PayPal. Bankers get very offended because it's a huge business, and obviously it's very complex. But again, that's just what it is. It's a low-margin business for them because there's a lot of humans. So for instance, one of the banks we work with, 1,100 people are involved in trade finance process from sort of the perspective. So the interesting thing is if we take a slice of this process, it's called import payments. It's not very important, but it kind of looks like any other process that you do in an enterprise. You receive some documents. There are scanned documents, spreadsheets, bills of goods, whatever they are. And you actually read these documents and you enter information from the document into the system. Then you do some kind of research on both parties, make sure they're not bad actors, and then you actually issue payments, right? So you interact with a bunch of systems, as you see there. You read a bunch of documents, and that's about 110 people that are doing this type of process, right? Trade finance has other pieces of this process which sort of do other things, but this is very indicative. So if you apply a company like WorkFusion, and if you forget about which technologies are applied where, within 12 weeks you can get 60% headcount reduction. That means we automate 60% of what people do rather quickly. And over time, it gets better and better. You can get to pretty much an autonomous or self-driving process. And that's how you do it. It's very indicative how enterprises do it. They take process by process, and they apply technology like WorkFusion to the process one at a time, and able to sort of get the reduction of human labor. And then, again, the question is, what do we do with them? Do we re-educate them? Do we move them to other work because they're well-trained? Do we let them go and realize the savings? These are all questions, but very indicative. So, obviously, if you think about banking, they're after savings, so they'll tend to let go of the employees, particularly if they're maybe offshore or maybe it's an outsourced contract. And right now with Trump administration, there is not a lot of appetite to continue offshoring. So it's better to automate the work and bring some of the jobs back. And again, finance and accounting, again, everybody knows, like you have people in back office processing invoices and checking invoices. Some invoices have to get paid. And believe it or not, a couple of hundred people might be like looking at an invoice. And if it's a large enough corporation, you have invoices in all kinds of languages. So people look at the invoice, make sure it's the right invoice, then pay the invoice, or maybe not pay the invoice, and depending how large it is, and so forth and so on. You can get 80% automation if you look at if you start with 100 people, 100% manual invoice processing. By applying machine learning and cognitive technologies, you can, within a fairly 12-week cycle or so, it's a number of examples that the humans are providing, you can get to 80% automation. So you've reduced 80 people, or at least they're not seeing that work anymore. And you working obviously 2 times faster. And end of month when you have a lot more invoices, robots are scaling up versus I have to bring more people to do the work. And that's a lot of the enterprise. They're saying, look, I can't get budget to hire any more people, but the amount of work that I have to do increases. And the cost pressure is there. So they don't know actually what to do. So the robots are coming in handy now because there's really a huge increase in demand. And if you think about, again, the industrial revolutions of the past, it was the demand for goods that drove a lot of the need for automation and mass production. And it created new jobs, obviously, in the end. So this is what we see now with knowledge enterprises, right? The demand is driving the need for automation, where before they could do it with the existing humans. So just if you think about at the high level, where can you apply it in the enterprise? And this is all from our experience. So many corporations have something that's called shared services, thousands and thousands of people doing various work. So the green, very green, you can apply it year 1. The light green, you can apply it year 2. And white is not a good fit. So you can see within shared services organization, which is a huge organization within any sizable enterprise, stuff is mostly green. That means can be automated. And these are very specific processes. If you think about banking, and this is what a typical bank's operations looks like, consumer retail, private institution, enterprise operation, it looks very, very green. So this is all eventually going away, 2 years, 5 years, because this is very automatable. And again, it's a very practical view of McKinsey's 51%, right, when they talked about the automation. Not a lot of white. So where the white is, you should be concentrating your resources, and probably the white boxes will grow and new white boxes will get created, right? And again, those will be more revenue creating boxes. A lot of the green stuff is not revenue, it's cost. And then with insurance, again, all of these areas, if you think about, will be automated. And it just gives you a view of the impact of automation on various industries, right? It's not just one industry that's going to go away. It's pretty much everything. And then you can do the same in manufacturing. You can do the same, you name a company, pharmaceutical, they all have this work. And finance and accounting is familiar to pretty much all the companies because everybody has finance and accounting office. And a lot of work in finance accounting. CFOs love to work with us because they understand they actually have inefficiencies in their own backyard. So finance and accounting, which is a cross-cutting function, again, a lot of work gets automated there. So what do we do on our part? Again, we're a technology company. We provide the software. We're not sort of an education space, but we have something that's, we're trying to do our part. So from our point of view, we've created something that's called Automation Academy. So we want to create jobs around people learning how to operate and apply this robotic process automation or this technology to various enterprises, right? So you don't need people who actually do this repetitive work. You need people who know how to apply technology such as ours within the enterprise to drive automation. So that's the part that we're doing. We're doing out there. We have something that's called Automation Academy, where we provide for free, essentially, all of the knowledge and tools necessary to be able, for somebody who's not a developer, not a programmer, to learn these technologies and essentially, instead of programming, for instance, right? And essentially be able to go and within their company or within, if they're getting a new job, to be able to apply automation and bring automation as an innovator to these companies, right? So that's the part we're doing. And we also have something we call automation challenges, where people that have learned within Automation Academy, how to automate things, we put out challenges where we pay prizes, where they say, well, I've done this for my company, right? And then they earn prizes. So there's a saying that says, future is not evenly distributed, but it's already here, right? And when you read these articles about artificial intelligence taking over jobs, and the question is always, well, where is it, and what kind of jobs, and so forth and so on. It might not be sort of evenly distributed within your particular company just yet, but it is out there in a very, very significant. And sort of the way technology grows is very much exponential. So we've seen huge uptick in automation within enterprise within the last 3 years. I think next 3 years will be very, very critical. Well, you see that 70% of headcount reduction within pretty much every enterprise. Well, that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much.